I remember reading a comment on Reddit about a couple years ago where somebody said something along the lines of, "What's taking so long with the next Doom game? It feels like they've been working on it for years." And I just thought that was so fucking funny that I still remember it years later. I envy that person because they must not be a Bethesda or Valve fan. The idea of waiting 4 years for a new game doesn't sound like much when you've been waiting 13. Speaking of which, with the new Half-Life game, I've had bigger and much more important matters to attend to than Doom Eternal. You know, a game that they took just a little bit longer to make. But I'm glad I finally got around to Doom Eternal because when it was actually time to sit down and play it, all I could think of was two things. The first thing being, holy shit, this is amazing. The levels are all absolutely incredible and awe-inspiring, the sound design is insane, and now there's cutscenes. I mean, cutscenes and story are a little sacrilegious for a Doom game, and I zoned out for most of it because I couldn't care less about a more detailed story for a goddamn Doom game, but at least they looked good. And then, when I really got into the meat and potatoes of the combat, the second thing I could only think of was, holy shit, this is hard as fuck. When I was first faced with what difficulty I should choose, I was like, alright, I've been playing video games for long enough, I can handle hard mode. And then I went in and I got my ass absolutely handed to me, so then I was all like, whoa, okay, guess I'm not there yet, let me just turn it down to normal. And then once again I got my butt cheeks ripped clean off, served to me on a silver platter, and then continued to get my ass handed to me so much that I kept thinking about turning it down to easy. But I forced myself not to because I knew I couldn't face the humiliation of doing that. At one point, I got so frustrated after I died that I clenched my hands on my keyboard so hard that I ended up grabbing a hold of my 8 key and popping it right out, causing it to fly across my room. When I found it and put it back in, I accidentally put it back in upside down, but I decided to leave it in like that in memoriam of that day. Doom Eternal gets this edge by something I didn't see coming because it's in stark contrast to the usual first-person shooter sequel philosophy of taking the same game and just doing it again. The gameplay mechanics have been noticeably revamped. You know how in Doom 2016 you had a favorite gun that you would main, and everybody would talk about their main gun and why the super shotgun was the best? There's no such thing as a main gun in Doom Eternal. They force you to use variety by the biggest change to the gameplay. You're constantly low on ammo and you have to manage it. Gone are the days of coming up to a demon, shooting them in one shot with the super shotgun, and then going on to the next demon and shooting them in one shot with the super shotgun the whole game, because you have to be constantly switching guns to not run out of ammo in a specific gun instantly. The chainsaw, an infrequently used weapon from the 2016 Doom that dumps out ammo whenever you kill someone with it, has become an integral part of the game and has been slightly redesigned to account for its new constant use. Besides the low ammo, the game also pushes you to constantly switch weapons with the new addition of weak points and having guns that certain enemy types are weak against. Let me make this clear that I think this is awesome because I'm all for the game forcing you to use variety in your guns, but there's one pretty big flaw in it that certain weapon upgrades become obsolete and unused when there's a certain attachment that wrecks certain enemy types or weak points. For example, in Doom 2016, one of my favorite attachments was the micro missiles on the machine gun, and I was excited to use them again in Doom Eternal. But now, the other attachment for the machine gun is a scope that breaks all weak points in one shot. Like, you'd be stupid not to use that on the gun at all times. And it just kind of sucks because the micro missiles are a lot of fun to use, and they're now going to become completely overlooked in Doom Eternal because of how useful the scope is for taking out weak points. Sure, you can change the attachment mid-fight, but there's so much shit going on at all times that I found that by the time I would think, this enemy type is weak against the shotgun bombs. Let me switch to that attachment instead of the automatic shotgun that I have on it right now. My face was already getting eaten by a giant flying mouth with one eyeball. So I think that a lot of people would agree that it helps to not give yourself even more to think about and to just leave the attachment that the enemies are weak against on at all times and to focus all your weapon points into fully upgrading those. Speaking of upgrades, there's quite a lot more now. It's to the point that a lot of people keep drawing comparisons to it being an RPG, and it doesn't help that they lay explaining all of these upgrade systems on you rapid fire at the beginning of the game when you just want to get to the shooting. But honestly, it becomes pretty easy to understand all the upgrade systems once you play the game a bit more, and while some of them do seem a little overkill and unnecessary, I get it. They needed to add progression and variety to the gameplay from the non-stop shooting because let's face it, Doom Eternal needs all the gameplay variety it can get, and I definitely take this form of variety over the sections where you're stuck in goo. These sections make me irrationally angry. The whole point of what makes Doom great is the speed and movement options, so what do you know? The sections where they take away your speed and movement options are painfully unfun. And then you have to deal with these tentacles that jump out and attack you in milliseconds. Like, great, now I'm pissed off and horny. I really want to know who was at the board meeting when they were trying to come up with gameplay ideas and said, let's take a game all about speed and jumping and take away the speed and jumping, and I hope they get fired. Like, look at this shit. You are literally stuck in a giant pile of sticky goo while tentacles come out of the ground to grab you. How did they manage to make something this hot, this unenjoyable? What makes these sections even worse is how the other main way they add variety to the gameplay, the platforming, works just fine and actually utilizes what makes this game great. I'd rather just do more of that. I've heard some slightly mixed thoughts on this aspect of the game, but I can firmly say that I really liked it. It's not a brilliant, mind-blowing game mechanic, but it's a fun enough detour from the constant shooting, and they were able to come up with some really creative and insane jumps with the new addition of dashes. This edition of the gameplay may seem like a random choice at first glance, but it was definitely made out of pure necessity because the enemies are now so much more intense that they needed to find a more effective way for you to dodge them. It's a really fun mechanic that adds a lot of intensity to the fast-paced, never-stop-moving style of Doom, as nothing feels more satisfying than expertly dodging around a shitload of attacks. There's so much more enemies attacking you that they even needed to find a way to get armor to you more consistently. The way armor worked in Doom 2016 and most shooters with armor systems like this is you'd stock up on armor before a fight, lose all of it right away, and then not have any more armor for the rest of the fight. I mean, maybe find some more armor around the arena, but not enough to really mean much. That system would not cut it for Doom Eternal, so they added a flamethrower that just causes enemies to drop armor whenever you kill them. I believe it also affects how much damage is dealt to an enemy or something like that, but you'll pretty much only be using it to get armor back. So now you have another thing to manage while in the heat of the fight. If that sounds like a lot to keep on top of, it is. And that's not even all of it. There's a couple smaller game mechanics and ideas that aren't introduced until later in the game that I didn't even talk about. Doom Eternal has been described as a combat puzzle, and that's a pretty good description of it from all the mechanics that you have to keep on top of. It's kind of like if you had 8 locks that could appear at all times, and you have 8 different keys for each of the 8 locks, and you have to think about which key to use on what lock while the entire room is on fire. But I can't help but to get this feeling that it's not like they set forward with the intent to create a combat puzzle, it feels like they accidentally invented a combat puzzle. It just feels like, as they were creating Doom Eternal, they just started tossing in all the mechanics and ideas that they were thinking of. And as they were testing it, they were like, oh shit, this is really complicated. It's so hard to keep track of all the game mechanics that it's almost like a puzzle. And then they all looked at each other with their eyes widening and said, alright, let's just roll with that. And that ends up being the game's biggest flaw and its biggest pro all at the same time. It's a bad thing because it can feel a tad bit over-bloated, and maybe even a little messy with its haphazardly piled on, borderline overflowing amount of mechanics. But at the same time, that's the reason why it's such an intense adrenaline rush to play and what makes it so satisfying. You're drowning in so much mechanics that once you understand everything and get all of it under your fingers, it's so satisfying that you're in cloud 9. I know that the overload may be off-putting at first, especially if you just wanted Doom 2016 except again like all shooters usually do with their sequels, but I implore you to keep trying, because once the gameplay clicks, it's like achieving shooter nirvana. Remember earlier how I said I kept dying when I first started playing the game? It actually challenged me and forced me to genuinely use my brain and get good at the fucking game. And that's pretty atypical for a high-profile AAA video game that's also a goddamn first-person shooter. When I did actually get good, I truly felt like I was the pinnacle of badassery, and those moments where I got stuck in that combat puzzle rhythm and I was kicking ass are the best moments I've ever felt playing a video game. It's one thing to make the player feel badass by just showing them cool melee attack animations, and another thing to make the player feel badass by making them kick ass from skill. Doom 2016 just fools you into thinking you're badass by showing you cool animations, while Doom Eternal truly does make you feel badass deep down by actually making you conquer something. You have to earn being a badass now, and I prefer this way much more, even if the compromise is a little bit of easily overlookable bloat. I think I'm going to give Doom Eternal a 4 out of 5.